Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. This is our last League of Women Voters program for December because of the holiday. And then we'd just like to make you aware that the schedule for January will change again because of the New Year's Day. So the board meeting will be on January 8th, and then our programs will be on the 15th and 29th, which is a change from the normal. So just to mark your calendars for these important events. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce, certainly doesn't need an introduction, Senator Halloran. It is our annual December meeting when we like to hear from our senator. And Senator Halloran, I'd like to keep it similar to the Saturday town hall meetings you have so that we can address the subjects that were mentioned in the email. And so I'll watch my clock on the computer and let's give a maximum of 10 minutes to the topics that suggested, which should allow some time at the end for questions then. Okay, does that sound like
good. Sounds like a plan.
Okay, the first concern was with the events at the Hastings Regional Center and moving the boys from the chemical dependency unit, and the girls from Geneva will be moved in March, we understand. What do you know, comments about that, please?
Well, it's been in the headlines off and on all through late summer and through the fall. I have prepared some information here, and if you'll forgive me, I am going to read it because not that my memory is not that good, but I don't have a teleprompter, so forgive me for just reading some of this, but I wanted to be sure to touch on all the key points. It may answer your questions, or it may lead to more questions, and that's fine. We can try to address those after I have read through this. The Hastings Regional Center land, first, it's important to know who governs, who has control over that property, right? The Hastings Regional Center land and buildings are owned by the Nebraska Department of Administrative Services, otherwise known as DAS. The Department of Administrative Services is a code agency, and it falls under the direction of the governor. The Nebraska legislature has no oversight authority with the Department of Administrative Services. The Department of Health and Human Services rents the Hastings Regional Center from the Department of Administrative Services. DHHS announced plans to move the boys' chemical dependency program from the Hastings Regional Center to Whitehall and Lincoln, and then subsequently move the girls' YRTC program from its temporary location in Kearney, where the boys' YRTC is located, to this new facility built for the boys' chemical dependency program at the Hastings Regional Center. Now, the move created quite a stir among the Hastings Regional Center staff, which was understandable, local community, myself, and many of my fellow senators. With the recent passage of LB 1188 late in last session, LB 1188 was titled Change Provisions Related to Youth Rehabilitation and Treatment Centers, sponsored by Senator Sarah Howard, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And it was questioned if DHHS had such authority to move the boys' chemical dependency program and the girls' YRTC program without first presenting their plans as required by LB 1188 to the legislature. An attorney general's opinion was sought by Senator Sarah Howard in her capacity as chair of Health and Human Services Committee, myself, and several of my fellow senators. The attorney general's opinion concluded that the DHHS had the right to move the boys' chemical dependency program, as LB 1188 did not specifically address that program, which is kind of a lesson case in point for us in the legislature to be a little more specific in writing legislation. However, the planned move of the girls' YRTC would not be possible until at least March 2021, as per LB 1188. LB 1188 basically prescribed that DHHS had to have a plan in place before they moved any of the programs for youth. I have a copy of the Attorney General's report with me, but I'm not going to bore you with the legalese of that. I was part of the DHHS LR 413 interim study to continue oversight of the residential facilities for juveniles, including the youth rehabilitation and treatment centers, under the supervision of the Department of Health and Human Services, when they visited the Hastings Regional Center this past summer. DHHS walked through the changes in the new facility, plans for reinforcing the new building at the Hastings Regional Center, and the closing of Building 3, where the Boys Chemical Dependency Program was being housed until new facilities were completed. Now, the main argument from DHHS for moving the Boys Chemical Dependency Program was twofold. One, the numbers have been declining due to sentencing reform and other programs offered at local community levels. And number two, the majority of the boys being placed into the program were from Lancaster, Douglas, and Sarpy County. Having the program in Hastings was a hindrance for families traveling to visit. Now, that was my monologue description of what transpired and who's responsible for it. I know the question on the agenda was how can we in the local community have more influence or input? It's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer. The Department of Health and Human Services, not unlike any large bureaucracy, oftentimes finds itself very distanced from communicating particularly well with local communities. And we saw that happen in this instance, right? We didn't know about it until the actions were well on their way taking place. You would think and you would hope, I certainly would, that departments would learn a lesson from this and say, well, you know, what we need to do is to engage the local community, whatever local community was involved, and engage them early and engage them often, and in effect partner with them. Now, whether they learn that lesson or not is to be seen. But as a legislature, there's not much we can do to force them to be, how would you say, use common sense and be reasonable in their actions. So anyway, that may lead to more questions than I answered. So if you have some questions, I'll try to address those.
Okay, let's cover the topics first, and then we'll have time at the end for questions on any
Yeah.
of the topics that you mentioned. Does that sound like a plan?
That's perfectly
So-
fine.
Okay, so we would like to hear then about the involvement of mental health, law enforcement, and I mentioned that LEAD currently has a study called Reimagining Public Safety. Your comments on that?
I think was part of that. I think part of that was referencing Senator Geist's. Am I mistaken? LR 379.
Yes, that's right.
Right. We reached out to Senator Geist's office on that study. It was a study to examine whether continuity of care and safety for individuals and the public can be enhanced by allowing mental health providers to coordinate with law enforcement. And Senator Geist did conduct a study group with key group participants, law enforcement, mental health providers, DHHS, social workers, to discuss the topic. It wasn't an open hearing. It was more of a working group, which isn't uncommon, where they bring in the players specific to the subject and discuss the topic at hand for the interim study. Mental health issues can be very complex, obviously very complex under any circumstance, but particularly complex when law enforcement's been called in. And the goal of the interim study was good. Is to explore various ways that law enforcement can work with professionals in mental health to better educate law enforcement and provide techniques and skills that they can use to protect both law enforcement and particularly to protect those with mental health issues. Senator Geist said that she's not sure yet whether she'll have a bill in play. She's currently evaluating the information from the interim study. My guess is that she probably will, but at this point in time, she hasn't got the language drafted for that. So that's all I know in regard to LR 379 on that interim study.
Okay. Then let's move to your, perhaps your priority bill. Thoughts
Well,
on,
okay. I'm not one of those senators that's big on volumes on sponsoring bills. I typically limit my bills to 5 or 6 bills. I am the committee chair for the Agriculture Committee, so there will be some bills that will come naturally to the Agriculture Committee that I will probably have to either personally sponsor or sponsor as the committee chair. But I am going to bring forth the a bill that Convention of States, Article 5 Convention of States, asking that Nebraska participate in an Article 5 Convention of States. And along with that, there will be a Convention of States Faithful Delegate bill. But aside from those two, I've got a bill that my brother asked me to sponsor, actually. He's a truck driver, and he said it's quite a safety hazard for truckers and drivers in general when it's raining or days like today when it's drizzling and snowing outside. It's quite dangerous being able to see vehicles when they don't have their headlights on. And so I'm sponsoring a bill that would require that headlights be on whenever the windshield wipers are on. In other words, whenever the weather prescribes that you have to have your windshield wipers on, visibility is less, and so it would be required to have headlights on. So it's a good safety bill, I think. Another bill I'm looking at is Second Amendment Preservation Act. It's an act that would protect state employees, including law enforcement officers, from being directed by the federal government to enforce any executive orders, agency orders, statutes, laws, or rules or regulations that the federal government regulations that violates an individual's rights affirmed under the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and Article 1 and Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States. Another bill that I'm looking at is would be a bill that would allow public safety officers to bring a civil action against any person, group of persons, organizations, corporations, or head of organizations or corporations for any injury suffered to that public safety officer during the officer's performance of official duties, or any abridgment of the officer's civil rights arising out of the officer's performance of official duties. In other words, it would protect public safety officers, and that would include police officers, obviously, probation officers, firefighters, and emergency care providers. It would allow them to sue in a civil court if they were physically damaged, say in a environment where bricks were thrown and an officer gets hit and that person's arrested, then that officer could sue that individual in civil court for damages. Okay. That's it, 5, 6 bills.
okay.
I have not chosen one to be my priority bill yet, so we'll see on that.
Okay. Before we move on to questions, what do you foresee as any interruptions in hearings or the legislature's proceeding with COVID?
Well, that's a good one to try to predict. No one seems to have an answer at this point in time. It's by statute, we have to meet January 6th. So we're going to convene on January 6th. What we'll probably do is elect committee chairs right away. That's normally what's done. after we're sworn in, we'll elect committee chairs. A group called the Committee on Committees will assign individual senators to their respective committees. And we have 10 days, initial 10 days to drop what we call dropping bills or entering in our drafted bills. And after that, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen. Public hearings are going to be a challenge because of the protocols that are going to probably be in place for social distancing and masking and so forth. So we'll just have to stay tuned on that, what's going to happen. It's hard for me to imagine that we can't have hearings, because that's the nature of what makes our legislature function very well are the hearings, because that's when we hear from the second house, and that would be you all as the citizens of the state. So it's going to be never a dull moment as this thing rolls along, but we'll just have to see how the COVID cases are going. Personally, I say just roll your sleeves up and get to work, and let's just do it like we ordinarily do. Now, I'd be lucky if there were half the legislators that agreed with that. So we'll probably have some protocols in place that will be quite inhibiting to our normal function as a legislature, would be my guess.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions now, and this is going to be more interesting on Zoom, but first of all, let's address any questions related to the conversation on DHHS and the regional center. Does anyone have a question on that topic?
Well, I certainly do. I'm Cammie Farrell, and it's going to be hard for me to state this succinctly, but I'm concerned about LB 1140, which is the bill that is on final reading. And I did receive a copy of it from a gentleman who's head of YRTC in Kearney via email. So I've kind of read through it, and it's a lot. Anyway, one of my questions, one of them is, first of all, it's my understanding that the departments that are under Health and Human Services have again been changed. There are now 5 categories of departments, and the juvenile division, which is now which covers all the residents that have been formerly at Hastings Regional Center Chemical Dependency Unit, who are now at Whitehall and Lincoln. They are all juveniles, so that means they're 18 and under. And all the residents at YRTC in Kearney that are proposed to come to Hastings, that are in Whitehall, that are in Lincoln Regional Center, are all 18 and under, if they're under the juvenile system. So my question to that is, are those young people all legal offenders? Is that one of the criteria, that they have to be in the legal system in order to get into these facilities? That's one of my questions.
Do I know? Well, I'm not on the Health and Human Services Committee, but my answer to that question would be that a court would, since they're juveniles, the court would assign them to one of these youth programs, right? Being a juvenile, they're not going to go to jail per se, or prison. The court will assign them to one of those programs.
But they have to be involved with the law in some way.
That's correct.
So are they guardians of the state? Are they legal guardians of this? Is the state their legal guardian?
Again, with a caveat that I'm not on that committee, I would say that they technically would be.
Okay.
Now, and I'm not an attorney, so I just want to qualify that as well.
Well, I just just am wondering how this all comes out when I read this final reading for this LB 1140, which is the bill that was, I guess, passed in the legislature, introduced by Health and Human Services regarding, I'm trying to think what they call it, the title of it is, it's relating to juveniles. Anyway, the first reading was last July. They must have had, this is the final reading that's coming up. And final reading, that means that the Health and Human Services Committee will review it. And that's to be reviewed by the Health and Human Services Committee in January. And then it will come into action, so to speak, in March. But does the legislature then have any teeth in what happens regarding this bill?
No, you say it was LB 1140?
Yes.
Okay, I don't have that pulled up in front of me. I don't have the answer to your question, but I can get back to you on that. I apologize for that. I mean, we have 700 and some bills, so I don't have that
Oh,
one.
I understand that, but this bill was mentioned. There was a meeting held over at the YWCA that I attended, in November or October. And you were there, and it talked about, this is the one that refers to the planning report or planning for the Health and Human Services Department regarding what will happen March 1st, 2021, which is the earliest date that we can move those residents, the females, out to HRC. I'm sorry if the rest of you want to, I'll quit talking if you guys have other questions.
No, that's fine. I think that was, if I'm correct, was LB 1188, but it deals with the having to have a plan prescribed in place before they can move them.
That's correct.
That's correct. Yes. The plan, irony of it is that they can't finish the move until March. We got that part right in the legislature, in the legislation that was written, but it didn't preclude them from doing all this preemptive moves that gave them very little other options but to complete the move, right? So they'll formally come from the committee in March and say, here's our plan. Here's our plan. We're going to move the girls YRTC from Kearney to Hastings because it's empty, right? Well, why is it empty? Well, they had the prerogative under their own, under legislation, they had the prerogative to manage the facilities of the juvenile programs, and they moved the boys to Whitehall. So it's conveniently empty because they went ahead and moved the boys. And the Attorney General said that they had the authority to do that. I think it's rather cynical the way they did it, very cynical. And I think, as I mentioned in a previous meeting, that's what causes constituents to be cynical, is when they see that these kind of actions are taking place, kind of in spite of the intent of what the law was intended to provide, right?
Well, one of the things that's in this LB 1140 says that this plan, which the LB 1140 is not a plan, the way I understand it. There is a plan to be submitted and reviewed by the Health and Human Services Committee.
Right.
In January. So the Health and Human Services Committee of the legislature will review this plan in January. And what I am asking at this time, because the gentleman I spoke with in Kearney was a little vague, is that a rubber stamp? Is that a plan that's coming from the Health and Human Service? No, it's coming from, the Health and Human Service Department. Is that going to just get, okay, here it is, it's done. We'll see you, go ahead, do your thing in March? Or will there be discussion? And will it be coming before the legislature? Is it a discussable item? Is there a no involved?
A lot of questions there, Ms. Farrell. I don't know the answer to those questions, other than
I'm looking at legislative procedure is what I'm kind of asking.
legislative procedure would be is if the Committee on Health and Human Services wants to challenge it, that's their prerogative to do that, right? Will they do that? I don't know.
You don't know. Okay.
I don't know. But they can challenge it, but like I tried to explain earlier and probably didn't explain it very well, the way the department went about making all these moves first, right? Moving the boys to Lincoln, leaving that building empty out there at the Hastings Regional Center, unused. Their plan will be brought to the committee, and their plan will simply say something like this: look, we have this fine facility at Hastings Regional Center, brand new building, never been used, and we have this need to separate the boys YRTC, the girls from the boys YRTC program in Kearney. We need to separate those genders, and so our plan is to bring them to this unused building, new building but unused, in Hastings. Isn't that a great plan? And what are they going to do? You know, Health and Human Services committee likely isn't going to be able to say, they're not going to be able to dictate to that department, well, you bring the boys back to Hastings.
No, I understand that.
Doesn't work, you know. But it is a very cynical move on the part of Department of Health and Human Services, the way they went about it. I'm not happy.
Senator Halloran?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's, somebody else has another question, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
I was appalled to see armed civilians walking around the halls of the unicameral with AR-15s around their shoulders. Do you consider abridgment of being able to open carry by civilians at the unicameral a abridgment of their Second Amendment rights?
Well, I do, and apparently the legislature agreed with that because the state patrol governs the is a law enforcement in place at the Capitol, and I visited with several law enforcement officers there, and they said they were watching people, keeping an eye on those few people, and they were perfectly fine with it. They told me they were less worried about those than they were about people they didn't know who were carrying arms.
Well, I would say as one of your constituents, the patrol may be fine with that, but I'm not fine with that. And open carry when they're children around the unicameral coming for their day in school, and to see people walking around with weapons meant to kill multiple people in open public space is an abridgment of my right of safety. And I think that the unicameral should be doing something. And it certainly is not an example of your Second Amendment rights to have a well-ordered militia with these people coming in and saying they constitute a militia and can carry those weapons. And when, especially nationally, we have all these problems with the Proud Boys and other people showing up with open carry. This is not, they can't have them in court. They should not be able to have them in the public forum. We've seen what happened in Michigan. This is absolutely absurd. And from a public safety standpoint, makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. The next question, please.
I think Joe's trying to talk. Joe, you're still
Can't hear her.
muted.
Oh, Joe is trying to,
I think maybe Joe was trying to say something.
okay.
Okay, Steve,
Yes, how are you, Joe?
I'm curious about whether there were unsolicited ballots sent around Nebraska before the presidential election.
To my knowledge, well, I think generally, I think everyone was afforded the opportunity to receive ballots, but the ballots weren't sent out directly that were unsolicited, to my knowledge. But we all had the opportunity to have a ballot mailed to us, but
If
there
you
had to be,
If you
right,
applied for it,
if you applied for it, yeah,
but not the other.
right.
And would
That's my,
would the legislature have been prepared to call a special session and take an action on that? It's not right what happened.
No, it's not. Well, the question is whether or not the legislature is ever willing to call a special session. It's kind of a joint effort between the legislature and the governor, and those are very rare. I would say under those circumstances, if there was question about the integrity of our voting system in Nebraska, there would be a willingness to have done that. But thankfully, I think in general, I think Nebraska has done very, very well in its voting process. The integrity of the voting process.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question?
This is Elaine Landwehr. And are we moving on to LR 379, mental health and law enforcement, or would you not like to go there yet?
Yes, Elaine, yes, you're right on time.
Okay. Well, the Judiciary Committee held 2 listening days in June, this past June, and they listened to people's experiences with police, and they listened to people's experiences with police as they protested, and they learned the need to make changes. And LR 384, LR 417, and LR 377, all 3 came out of that. And on October 15th, the Judiciary Committee held a hearing concerning LR 384 brought by Steve Lathrop, and LR 417 brought by Senator Matt Hansen, and LR 377 brought by Patty Penzing Brooks. And all 3 of those resolutions were to review and identify policing reforms in Nebraska and opportunities to establish improved oversight and accountability of law enforcement across the state. Because during those 2 days of listening in June, they realized that there was systemic racism and systemic racial injustice throughout our criminal justice system. So I realized that you have your bill coming that is going to help police bring civil lawsuits, which we do need to support our law enforcement, and we do need to make sure our law enforcement is protected. But we also need to make sure that we eliminate systemic racism. And what is your plan to help with that?
Well, my plan is to look at whatever legislation comes down the pike and address it as it comes down. I have no idea what legislation is going to be sponsored or drafted on the subject. I'm sure there will be some, but until I see the language of that, I'm not going to make a broad statement on it. I think the public needs to be protected against police that do outrageous things, such as in the case of George Floyd, right? But I don't judge all of the police based upon the handful of incidences where someone was injured or killed, and as in the case of George Floyd, I don't judge the whole police enforcement based upon those few bad apples and characters that do that. So we'll look at the legislation as it comes in front of us, but right now, none of that's available to me to look at.
Have you had the opportunity to be able to read the hearing information from the 2 days in June, or the hearing information from the October 15th hearing? I know you're busy and there are a lot of resolutions and a lot of bills, but if you haven't had the opportunity to be able to do that, I really would encourage you to try to take time for that.
I will do that.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. I appreciate that.
You bet.
You, Elaine. Any other comments on the public safety issue with mental health and law enforcement?
Chris, I did put everybody on mute, so if you'd like to say something, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I would just support what Phyllis said about the open carry of guns in the state legislature or around the Capitol building. as a constituent public.
Okay, thank you.
I would also, pretty terrifying to have that happening with our legislators, but also with the children being present.
Well noted.
Thank you.
Okay, questions in general then. Senator, I'm a little bit surprised property taxes haven't come up. You do see that as an issue for the legislature again? Or not?
I don't think it, well, I do. Unfortunately, I mean, in the last session, we passed 1107, and 1107 really didn't fundamentally address property tax relief. It was, as has been described, it was a decrease in the increase in property taxes, but there was nothing fundamentally in it dealing with property tax relief. And the problem with that is that a lot of people campaigned in this last campaign cycle saying what a great bill that was. It's a step towards property tax relief, where fundamentally it didn't do that. But the perception will be in the legislature that we took care of that last year with 1107. I think there'll be a bill come back this year. It was sponsored last year. Bill dealing with a consumption tax that would replace property taxes, income tax, sales tax, and inheritance tax. It would be a flat retail at retail level for new, not used consumable goods. And it would replace all those other taxes. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Okay.
I'm planning on being on two of the same committees I was on last year, obviously agriculture, see if I get reelected to committee chair, business and labor as well. And I'm moving from natural resources to government, military and veterans affairs.
Okay.
That's my intent anyway.
Another question? I want to give it a little bit of time with the Zoom procedure here.
My only regret this year is that earlier on in the year I didn't invest in Zoom. I think it would have paid well.
Yes, a year ago, I never would have guessed that I was doing this, but yes.
Yeah. Well,
I have a
yeah, go ahead.
Question?
I have a question, Senator Halloran, about education, and I know you aren't on the education committee, but I was wondering if you've had some contact with the public schools or any of the schools in District 33 as to if they're able to get the right amount of PPE for the staff and students, if you've been in contact with them about the protocols, if they've been able to get enough of the sanitizers. How is that going? And I was wondering if you've been following the line on the schools websites. Most of them are list the number of people out, with coronavirus on a certain day, or the number that's being quarantined on a certain day. And those numbers are just astounding. And I was wondering if you've been in contact with them or following this, or can you just kind of explain that?
I have not been contacting them to see if they've had enough any issues with supply of PPE. Normally, under those circumstances, they're more than understanding that my office is open for me to be contacted if they're having an issue with any issue, and they have not contacted me with concern about that at this point in time. But they certainly can and should. But it's my general understanding that that's not been an issue. I say that only because I have not heard from them.
Have you been keeping track of the numbers on their websites?
I go to that website periodically, and the Hastings Tribune has become about the only news that you can find on the Hastings Tribune is the number of COVID cases. And so I'm very much aware of that. I would
I
say,
guess I meant
go ahead.
in the schools particularly.
Yeah. Well, being aware of those numbers, not much I can do about it, right?
Well, I just thought maybe you had been following them. I follow Hastings Publics and Adams Centrals, and I see the number of students or staff that have tested positive or that are out. And it just makes me empathetic for all of the people in that situation.
Mhm.
It does with me as well. And part of the issue is, and it's not just within Nebraska, but it's across the country, the sensitivity level for the tests, the COVID testing is, I have heard anywhere from 35 to 40 times the level it needs to be sensitivity wise. And so it catches a lot at various levels of intensity of the disease. And it's probably so sensitive that it's inflating the numbers at some level. But if you're testing positive, and you have to quarantine, right? So it's like the face mandate. I'm all for people wearing a mask, and but I've still been asking consistently for clinical studies on the efficacy of wearing masks in inhibiting the disease, and I have had no one show me a clinical study, double-blind clinical study that shows the efficacy of wearing masks. But if it makes people feel good to do it, then I'm all for them doing that. We'll see how it is in the legislature. I'm sure we're all going to be tested on a daily basis and required to wear a mask, but we'll see. But it's hard on schools. Last week I was in a hearing. It wasn't a hearing, but it was a webinar with mental health providers. It was hosted by Vice Chair of HHS, John Arch, Senator Arch. And these mental health advisors were lamenting the fact that mental health issues are growing exponentially, particularly in our youth, but across the spectrum of age, with all the social distancing. We're social creatures, so the more social distancing we do, it has a negative impact on a lot of people's mental health. And they were lamenting the fact that these numbers are growing very rapidly, the numbers of people that are experiencing mental health problems. So it could be an unintended consequence of some of the protocols that we're using. We're going to see more mental health issues pop up as time goes by. And that's unfortunate. These kids aren't at some level being allowed to be kids, and they're being scared to death, and that anxiety level is growing for them.
Well, I think that the sadness is just the pandemic itself. It's causing us to have to take these steps. It's not the steps that are causing the problem. It's not happening in a vacuum. It's not somebody deciding, oh, we need to do the social distancing because we are unaware of that there might be consequences. It's because of COVID itself, which is a real thing.
It's a very real thing. But there's been a lot of studies, clinical studies, that show that children, school-age children, are the least susceptible to COVID-19. Now they can carry it, and that's an issue for people that are around them. It's an issue for teachers. My hope is that the vaccine is coming out very soon, and that it's going to prove to be effective, and that we can eventually move on beyond this pandemic.
Are you going to take it as an example to your constituents to get the immunization?
That's a, how would you say? That's a personal health issue. I'm going to keep to myself.
Well, they were talking about how to get it as widespread and get as much compliance as possible so it'll be most effective and we can get back to normal. And one of the best ways to do it was to have people in leadership positions by example show that they are unafraid to take it. So I was just curious.
I'm not afraid to take it, but I'm not sure if I took it, it might be counterproductive. More people might decide not to take it.
Okay. Okay, any final questions as I see the clock winding down here? Senator, I might ask, as you were listing your bills, would you tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment one and what you were hearing about that's on your list of bills?
Yeah, basically, it creates a sanctuary state to protect the state citizenry from having a law from the federal level come down that would take away our Second Amendment rights, right? So it would allow for law enforcement within the state of Nebraska not to have to abide by that federal law because it's in violation of our Second Amendment constitutional right.
Okay, states' rights rather than federal rights.
Yep, Article 10, exactly.
Okay. Anyone else with a question? Judy, I see you. Are you okay?
I'm just not understanding what federal laws would be of concern.
Senator Halloran, did you hear Judy Sandine's comment?
I could not hear her, no.
I'm sorry. I'm just wondering what federal laws would be of concern.
It's not a concern. It's a good question, Judy. It's not a concern about any federal laws that are right now. What it is, it's a preemptive law to preempt any future laws that might be a concern, right?
Have you had a legal opinion as to whether that is possible? That your law is, or your attempt has any likelihood of working or being a real thing?
Well, that will come down as soon as I draft the law, and I'm sure it will be brought to bear in front of legal counsel or attorney general to look at, to rule on that.
So are you saying it's like the sanctuary cities saying that in their cities the people don't have to comply, law enforcement don't have to comply with the federal immigration people by turning people in if they're in custody? That you have the right to make that decision to not comply with federal law?
No, because it deals specifically with the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and to our state constitution. In other words, if a federal law abridged the U.S. Constitution's right to the Second Amendment, that's different than what you're talking about for sanctuary cities. There's no law in the Constitution that allows for protecting cities to not abide by federal laws on dealing with immigration. That's not in the Constitution.
And who would decide that it was abridgment of Second Amendment rights? Who would make that decision?
Well, ultimately, the courts would.
But if you didn't agree with the decision?
If who didn't agree?
The people in the state, or?
Well, if the people in the state don't want to, if the people in the state aren't comfortable with abiding by the U.S. Constitution and our state constitution, then we have larger issues than that. Then, because that's where the protection resides, is in our Constitution.
But if it's in the Second Amendment issue and the courts decide that it isn't an abridgment of Second Amendment rights, then you're wanting to do something about it would be moot, wouldn't it?
Well, we'll let the courts decide. That's exactly what the courts are there to do.
Okay, I see our time slipping away, but is there one last question? I heard something. Is someone trying to unmute?
Charlie.
Yeah.
It's Charlie.
Pat, did you have a question?
Maybe Charlie did.
Oh, Charlie is her dog. Okay, no, I hear no further questions. Senator Halloran, thank you for being with us again. Hopefully when December 2021 comes around, we're back to meeting in person again, and would look forward to you and our previous way of salad luncheon and eyeball to eyeball meetings. So again, we thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I did miss having lunch with you all. I told my wife maybe I should have lunch while we're on the meeting so that we kind of feel like we're still having lunch together.
There we go.
Yes.
No, I appreciate the invite, folks, and I appreciate the questions, and my office is always open, so contact me whenever you have an issue.
Thank you, Belva, for
Thank
making the
you.
arrangements.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
Bill.
Belva. Thank you, Senator Halloran.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you, Senator.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas and
Yeah.
have